Hello and welcome to React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabit. Today on our panel, we have Spencer Carley.
Hello.
And our special guest today is Christian Falch, along with Eric Vicenti. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And Eric, thanks for coming back.
Great to be here. Thanks.
And as you could probably guess, with Eric on the show, we're going to be having some discussions around navigation-related topics in general. But Christian has been working on a pretty interesting library that works with navigation. And that's kind of what we're going to be here kind of talking about. But before we get into the main topic, can you kind of give us an introduction to yourself, Christian?
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll try. It's a long story because I'm kind of old. I'm 47 now, so it's been a lot of different things that I've done during my professional life. Actually, I started coding when I was 11. I had a grandfather who thought that computers might be the new thing. So he bought this microcomputer for me and my cousins and told us that he believed that it was a good thing to learn how to code or how to use these machines. So he bought this machine and he told us that he wouldn't buy any games for us. So if we wanted to play games, we had to learn how to make them ourselves. So I actually sat down and watched all my friends playing games on their Commodores and other old computers, and I didn't have a single game. So I started to create games on the old on the machine, writing in BASIC. Actually, I'm not very impressed by any of the games that I created, but it taught me how to program. So that was my way into computers when I was really, really young.
Wow, that's awesome. So you've been around coding since like longer than like 37 years, I guess, or 36 years. That's crazy. So you must be pretty well versed in a lot of different things, I guess, by now, right?
Yeah, you can say that I've touched into quite a few different things. That's correct. So I've been doing all sorts of things in computers. I've been running my own companies since I graduated from high school. So my first company was actually a small company doing radio commercials. So we thought that this might be the new thing, doing commercials on the radio, and the Norwegian authorities just allowed radios to play commercials. So we started and had a blast doing that. But I always came back to computers. So when my father got this x86 clone back in the days, I started programming on that as well. And went into Visual Basic, and then I went along with Delphi, with Object Pascal. I did some assembly, some C programming, and then I started the company doing development environments for the Palm OS. So that was kind of the first mobile device that actually worked for people. I don't know if you remember those devices.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a cool little device. So I actually have a box of those sitting up in the attic that I'll probably take down someday and see if they still works. So that was actually a development environment inspired by Visual Studio. So we had a small company. We were, I think, 13 people writing the tools for the Palm OS, writing visual designers and compilers and all sorts of different strange things. And this tool was actually, I think, in the market for a couple of years. And we became a partner with Palm, the company behind the Palm pilots. And we eventually closed the company, but the visual designer actually lived along with as a bundle with Metroworks, who was the preferred development environment for Palm in those days. So that was really interesting to create development tools. I mean, developers, we are some of the most demanding people on earth when it comes to tools, and we want it all and we want them to work. So it was a really, really interesting experience to be part of.
So what is the company that you actually run now? So FromX, that's the company. Like, what all are you involved with, I guess, right now with that company?
Yeah, so that's basically a very small consultancy company. We are two people, me and my colleague Björn. We are only doing mobile development in React Native, actually. So from time to time, we have to do some client work in React.js, but our main focus is React Native and creating mobile apps for clients, actually. So we're doing all sorts of different things, from apps from ground up until delivery, and we are also doing projects like helping customers who have certain problems, implementing push messages, or some of the more native parts of doing app development.
Well, I know that you've had some experience with Android native, native iOS, Xamarin. Why did you move to React Native, and how has that worked so far for your business?
So this is actually quite a good story as well, because I had never touched a Macintosh computer until 2008. So one day when I was traveling, I saw this ad on the train saying that you could take part in a contest and maybe win a new MacBook Air. So I decided, okay, I have some free time, let's just try it. And then I was the lucky winner. So in 2008, I actually got my first Mac. And of course, I booted up Xcode and started developing. And then I went into the whole Objective-C business with and created games and did a lot of cool apps, or maybe not cool, but different apps for iOS. And I've always enjoyed doing mobile development because I think the constraints on the platforms leads to some creative and interesting solutions instead of doing cloud development where you can spawn new instances of servers all the time. You're able to you have this limited box and everything has to work on this box, and it's a single user, it's a almost a single app running at the time, even though you have some options of doing background tasks now. So then I just went along and into some Android stuff, and then I actually had a client that I worked where we were using C#, so I started doing using MonoTouch, which was what later became Xamarin. So that was kind of how I got into Xamarin. And then we had a client that wanted to use React Native. This was almost 2 years ago. And we agreed with the client that React Native might be a little too immature at the moment. So we went with a Norwegian company that created a JavaScript and OpenGL framework for doing mobile apps. So we spent almost a year doing development on that app, and then the company who provided the development tools just pulled the plug on us. So we had to start all over again. And then we decided this was actually last Christmas. We decided, okay, we have to learn something new. So instead of going back to Xamarin, which we think maybe has grown in a direction that we don't. I won't say too much about it, but we do not agree with all the latest things that has happened within the Xamarin environment. So we decided to try out React Native, and we really enjoyed it. It was kind of the solution to all the issues that we were having on Xamarin, and of course, it solved a lot of stuff on the project that suddenly didn't have a development environment. So that was kind of why and how we got into React Native. And I mean, all the things about how props and states just flow through the app using Redux. You have one single state instead of a big complex system of integrated modules that know of each other. It was really something we enjoyed and liked a lot. And I think we started looking into React Native during the Christmas vacation, and in the end of January we were already delivering stuff on the platform. So it's
that's pretty good.
Yeah, it was fantastic. But I mean, of course, we had so much experience from iOS development and from Android development and everything, so it wasn't that hard for us, and we know how the platforms work. So it was kind of easy. So, but yeah, it was fast, but we had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, you sound like you definitely have a distinct advantage over, the traditional, or I wouldn't say traditional because what is traditional really with React Native, but I would say the typical company that might go into building React Native mobile apps that came from a web background. I think every company that I've done consulting with that has a native background does much better in general, like as far as shipping and not having serious issues if they have a native background, because a lot of apps that I've worked with, I would say almost all of them that are actually shipping and going into production end up having native code that needs to be changed. That's why you end up with teams that whenever I work with a company, I always tell them they need to have at least one native engineer, hopefully like one iOS and even one Android on the team. And that seems to make everything go much smoother.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that has been the success factor for us, being able to leverage on that knowledge. So it has been really good. Yeah.
So we're about to get on to the topic, but I had one last question. I know that you mentioned, before we got on, that you have a daughter that's in the entertainment industry and you help manage her business. So I'm kind of curious about that, if you can kind of tell us about that. It has nothing to do with React Native.
No, it's my daughter. She's 22 years now, and a couple of years ago, she was taken on as an actor in a new Norwegian series from the Norwegian broadcaster, and that became an instant success. So she kind of kickstarted her career and has been given so many options and possibilities. So someone had to look after her, and that someone kind of became me. It's actually a series that is currently airing on Facebook Watch, I think, in the US as well, but with US actors. So probably you haven't seen it, but it's become quite a big thing here in Europe.
Pretty cool. So, okay, cool. Anyway, so let's get on to the topic. So can you talk about why you created the library and exactly like what it does and why someone would want to try it out?
Yeah. So one of the first things that we noticed when we started using React Native was the navigation. So we spent, like every other React navigation developer, you probably have been trying out different navigation libraries, and we landed on the JavaScript React navigation library that Eric is part of. So, I had built some libraries for Xamarin back in the days for doing shared transitions when navigating. So when you go from one screen to another, you basically just slide the whole new screen across and show it. That's basically what happens. So the library that I had created previously had the shared element transition working. So you could define elements on one screen that should be moved over to become an element in the next screen. So creating a more dynamic user interface where you could focus on elements that you brought from one screen to another screen. So, and that was kind of missing in the React Native world. So I thought, okay, let's see if this is possible. And I like challenges. So since I was new to React Native, I really wanted to dive deep into the internals of React Native and see what I could do. So that's actually why I created this library, to be able to do transitions while navigating. And it has become much more than just doing shared element transitions. It's basically all types of transitions when navigating. So say if you have a list of elements, those elements can be slided in as you enter the first screen, and then they can be transposed into the next screen, into images, etc. And my main goal was to create a very simple API, so that you could just write your screens just the way you usually write them, and then you could wrap the elements you want to transition either as shared element transitions or regular transitions, and wrap them in tags, and everything would just work. And one of the other goals that I set was to be able to create transitions that used both native and non-native animations. But because as you might know, React Native has a really good animation system, but not everything is possible using the native drivers, which is running the animation on the native side of the app. So some of them has to be run as part of the JavaScript thread, and some is run on the native thread. So that was one of the goals, to be able to create transitions using both. And I don't really know why it happened, but I think I mentioned this to Eric and Brent maybe, and they tested it out and saw it and liked it, and suddenly it was all over. So actually, I don't know how many stars we have now, but it's around 1,200 or so on GitHub. And I'm trying to maintain this library and handle all the issues that comes in, and see if I can kind of provide a good experience for people using the library. Because my goal is for people to just npm install the library and wrap something wrap their user interface in some special tags, and off they go. So that's the goal.
Yep. Well, it's a pretty exciting development because, one of the things with React navigation from the beginning is that on the core team, we didn't really expect it to be us to be able to develop every sort of navigation view and every sort of presentation style that people might imagine in their apps. And that's what we see when you have things like React navigation stack and tabs inside of core. So I'm very excited. I was very excited to stumble upon fluid transitions and see someone really running with this concept and making a custom navigation experience for other people. And the sort of high level API of fluid transitions is just really elegant, where, as you say, Christian, you can just kind of start wrapping a couple different components with these transition tags that mark different components on your screen as needing to transition in one way or the other. And that kind of allows you to have a totally declarative screen with your inside of your app. Whereas if you have to configure something on React Navigation's stack header, you're not rendering the header yourself. So it's a little bit more constrained. You have to use the navigation options to configure the header. And it's not quite as elegant as the Fluid Transitions API, where you just render the whole screen. So we are thinking about ways that we can actually take this approach that Fluid Transitions has and maybe build on top of Fluid Transitions to implement a new stack that allows people in their apps to just render the header. And we can still support all of that crazy magic that goes on in the header where we basically have a shared element transition for the text as it animates from being the title of the current screen to the back button of the next screen. And so it's been very exciting to watch this develop, and I'm glad that we're working further on this together.
Yeah, me too. Because it has been really interesting to be able to discuss directly with you and see and get some cool answers and suggestions to some of the problems that I've run into during the development of this library.
Yeah, hopefully that's a good lesson that if anyone listening to this podcast wants to sort of engage further and just start building tools for other people in their apps, you should just go for it and publish it to GitHub, send it around to Brent and me, and we're very likely to promote it because we want to get an ecosystem going where everyone's able to build navigation tools for each other on top of this framework, rather than us attempting to build everything for the whole world.
I was just curious, what has actually gone into building this library? Are you just basing it on the React Navigation API, so it's kind of interchangeable, or were you actually able to build on top of a stack navigator, like a tab navigator, any of those?
The fluid transition is the basic building block is actually just another stack view, which is not it's rendering from a stack router. So I'm basically using the APIs that it is and just plugging in another view to render the screens.
Okay.
Just as the stack view.
Very cool. Yeah, it was just something because I wanted to get more involved in React navigation in the past, and it's just cool seeing how like Eric was saying, how you can just take these building blocks that have been built and just start building on top of it, and actually using those underlying principles and components that are there to build awesome stuff like fluid transitions.
So looking at the documentation and stuff and the examples, it looks like a combination of this is like a navigation library, but almost like an animation library as well. When would you use regular, the animated API versus something like this? What would be the best use case for this library, I guess you would say?
We have actually used it in some of our production apps. So basically what we do is that we create screens, and instead of using a stack navigator, we use the fluid navigator. Basically, that's it. And then we start decorating and declaring transitions so that screens have different elements on each screen, have their own appear transitions, so they come flying in or appear fade in or something like that. And then we declare share element transitions between related elements between screens. So it's basically something we just plug in and start to use whenever we're kind of fleshed out the initial structure of each screen.
Okay, cool. And then when you transition away from a screen, you can also declare those as well, or does it just do the opposite of the incoming transition?
No, you can actually declare both appearing and disappearing transitions, and you can also write your own. So you can provide functions declaring or implementing your own transitions. So I've done stuff like creating Bezier curves where things are actually swirling around and stuff. So it's kind of extensible as well, just as the React navigation platform is extensible, and we built this on top of it. This is also kind of extensible, and that's also the goal, so that you shouldn't stop anywhere. You should be able to just continue develop, and if you have an idea, you should be able to extend the transitions that are provided by the library.
So one of the cool examples that I'm seeing on the documentation is the page for, it looks like a shopping cart page for like a shoe, and then like the shoe comes transitioning in with a bunch of cool transitions. Then you click, so you go from like the main list view to the item view, and then you click on an item, and then that takes you to like a more detailed item view. That's really interesting. Like, how much work would it take to actually do some cool stuff with this library? Like, how much extra code do people need to like be writing? And how much do they have to understand like how animations work in general, I guess you would say?
Yeah, I don't know if they need to know too much about animations, because that's completely hidden by the library itself. So what you usually do is that you create each screen individually and make sure that they look and feel right, and that they scale across different screen sizes. And then you decide which elements should be part of the shared element transitions. I mean, the elements that should be going from one screen and transitioning into the next screen. And that's basically just wrapping them and setting a common ID on the elements. And then you could decide how each element should appear on screen. Should they slide in from the left or from the right? Should they fade in? Should they scale in? And you can also, as I said, decide whether or not they should have different transitions to when they disappear from the screen. And this is basically just by wrapping elements or the existing views in special transition tags describing those transitions. So it shouldn't be that hard, but as the developer of the library, I'm not sure if everybody really understand what's going on and how to solve this. But I think from looking at the issues that I get from on GitHub, it looks like people usually get the idea behind the library. I don't have too many questions about people trying to do stuff that the library is not meant to do, and that I think could be a good it could be good for me.
So I see that this library is just a JavaScript only. So if someone installs it, they can just install it without having to link it. And knowing that you came again from like a Xamarin and then native, and you've done all this other stuff, like, is JavaScript something that you've worked with over the years, or is this something that's kind of like new to you and your company?
Actually, it's quite new. So I've done JavaScript doing HTML and web apps back in the days, but that was with jQuery, and even without jQuery, I actually, the first web application I wrote, we had to write our own CGI engine. So you got the network request in, and we handled the request, and we parsed everything and did everything manually in the app. So I've been kind of toying with JavaScript for a lot of time, but it has only been the last couple of years that we've actually been using JavaScript for anything in production. And React Native was something we started doing, as I told you, under a year ago. So it's JavaScript is kind of new to us, but I mean, the language is so similar to other languages that we've been using, like C# and C and stuff like that. So it's not that hard for us to use JavaScript today.
Yeah, since you have come from some of these other languages, do you use TypeScript, or you just use JavaScript for now, or does it depend on the project?
No, we have tried out TypeScript in some of the projects that we've been through, but actually we have been so much more successful using Flow. I think the TypeScript has given us a few issues in every project, especially when we upgrade from one React Native version to another, while Flow is just kind of working in the background. And if you declare and know your types, it's kind of working good enough for us to be usable.
Coming from working with Xamarin and all these different technologies, are there pros or cons that you've found working within React Native or working within large JavaScript projects in general? Or like anything, you kind of miss from those other platforms when coming to React Native?
Not at all. No, actually not. It's from time to time we have to go back and open up Xamarin Studio and do some maintenance on some of the older projects. And I really do not miss the build and compile bit of doing development. I must say that hitting refresh and seeing, or even using hot reloading in when you develop is such a relief. And combined with tools like Flow, which we are using, I think that type safety is good enough for us to be able to trust our applications. We also use unit testings when we write code. So it's even though Fluid Transitions, the library, doesn't have too many unit tests, we usually build quite large sets of unit tests to be able to regression test our app in a good way. So no, I don't miss anything at all. And I also think that the JavaScript community with NPM and packages and everything is such a good environment to be part of. And I also think that the architecture of the apps written with React Native is so much better than what we were used to in example Xamarin, where you didn't have any architecture. You had to write the architecture from bottom up by yourself, and often ended up with code that wasn't that easy to maintain.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of people that come on the show that were doing Xamarin and then to React Native. A lot of times we do have native developers. We did have someone on the Xamarin team on here maybe a year and a half ago. So it is kind of interesting to hear the differences there. So that's pretty cool to see that you kind of like React Native that much more. What about Flutter? Have you looked at Flutter any? Have you considered it?
No, actually, we have just viewed a few videos and looked at a few examples. And at the moment, I'm not experiencing. Our experience is that the environment and support from a big community that React Native provides is too small in the Flutter world to be able to really consider it as something we can use at the moment.
Yeah, I kind of agree. React Native at this point is like almost 4 years old, and it's pretty robust, and yeah, you can get pretty much any question that you'd like answered somewhere, it seems like these days. So
yeah, the exciting thing that I see, especially when we're talking about Flutter, is that React Native has just changed so much in its 4 years. One example is how everyone in very short order is starting to depend on React Native Gesture Handler and now Reanimated, which were kind of the missing pieces when it came to delivering 60 frames per second gesture interactions on React Native. And I'm excited to have sort of gotten in that in the past couple of months, working on the new transitioner for React Navigation. And I hear, Christian, you've been toying with Reanimated as well and having a pretty good experience. Yeah?
Yeah, that's correct. I've tried out Reanimated, and this is kind of the answer to all my questions. It's such a great library. It's basically a really flexible and animation library that runs everything in native, and everything is declared in JavaScript. So you build up these big trees of expressions, and they will be evaluated by the runtime on the native thread, and they run fast as you haven't seen anything before. And I think you can animate almost everything. Isn't that correct, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a programming language that you kind of control from JavaScript, and you just kind of compose a bunch of functions, kind of like animated.add, but which we've probably used in the animated library for a while. But it has all the sort of primitives that you might need to have like a fully Turing complete language where everything is running on the UI thread. It has basically the equivalent of an if statement, and the ability to call back into JavaScript using the sort of call primitive. So it's extremely open-ended. And yeah, I think that you could use it to create basically any gesture that you could dream up, any animation that you dream up, and potentially there could be other use cases where you might want to have arbitrary logic on the UI thread that might not even be animation related.
Yeah, that's correct. You could use it for something completely different. That's true. So one of the big issues that I had writing Fluid Transitions was that I wanted, as I told you previously, to be able to animate stuff like borders and shadows and background colors and even font sizes and stuff. And they are currently available in the animated part of React Native. So I had to spend a lot of time writing some wrapper code that actually were able to wrap components inside a nested structure, where some of part of the structure did the native animation and another part did the JavaScript part of the animation. So that way I was actually able to combine native and non-native animations. But of course, that's kind of a hack. It's not a good solution. And when we tried to do especially font size animations using this technique, we weren't able to get the speed and the looks and the smoothness that we thought we should. So Reanimate is certainly giving us all the possibilities that we need. So it's been so much fun diving into the Reanimated library. And it also has support for the old syntax from Animated in React Native. So you're able to kind of just change and import and then off you go, basically.
That's cool. Well, I haven't tried it out yet, but the fact that you can just drop it in and continue working with your existing code sounds pretty promising. Or it sounds like something that I could just try out next time instead of just using the regular animated library.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. So my hope is that the Reanimated will be part of the React Native core, so that we will be able to just start using it without having to link and set it up like we have to do today. But I don't know, Eric, if you know anything about the plans for the future of Reanimated.
Yeah, I think they're on the React Native core side of things. Everyone's kind of planning on waiting for the dust to settle on the Fiber project, on the Fabric project. And because that's a sort of massive undertaking where they're basically rebuilding React Native core so that you can synchronously call into JavaScript. So I think on the other side of that, things might look a little bit different. But for the meantime, I've found that Reanimated is quite stable, and they're very responsive to issues that you file if you can find a very specific bug. And the great news is if you use Expo, and I know a lot of people do, then you'll be able to use it just out of the box. In fact, it's already inside of the latest versions of Expo. And it's going to continue to be updated there.
Yeah, I know, and that's really good that is part of Expo. So I know that a lot of people use Expo for development. I don't actually. I usually just start off by the command line, starting stuff from the Xcode and run it to be able to debug stuff and things. But I've tried out Expo and it works great. It's a really good tool.
Definitely.
You know, we've talked a little bit about navigation because we're talking about this library in general. But Eric, I know that you all are working on React navigation in general, and then there may be like a new version coming out. Do you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, definitely. I'm quite excited because we're getting very close to being able to release React Navigation v3. And it's a change I've been looking forward to for a while. And it's not a very dramatic API change. It should be very easy for everybody to move over to this new version, just with a couple of different renamings and sort of one additional function call. But the reason I'm excited about it is because it finally takes this one repository that we've been working in and splits it up into several different projects. So now you're going to be able to consume React Navigation Core independently from Stack or tabs, and you're going to be able to, you've always been able to contribute your own navigators, but by breaking them up into different pieces, we're hoping to encourage people to really start contributing their own navigators that are built on top of React Navigation Core. But the React Navigation package as we know it today is going to continue to exist. It's just going to literally pull in just this smorgasbord of different components, including Stack and tabs, and we might get drawer back in there as well. But you're going to import core, under the scenes, it imports core and it imports native. Both of those are in the React Navigation NPM org. And native binds React Navigation Core to sort of all the React Native things. So it provides you the app container that really manages your navigation state. And the exciting thing there is we're finally going to pave the way for people to consume React Navigation on the web with kind of a clean dependency tree, because they're going to be able to import React Navigation Web, which is going to have utilities for rendering on the server and rendering on the client, and in addition to React Navigation Core. So I'm hoping that now that we have the modules split up in this way, that we'll see more of an explosion in the ecosystem for building custom navigators on top of React Navigation on native, of course, like fluid transitions, but also on the web. And maybe one day we'll start to see libraries emerge that work both on web and native as well.
A little story here, because I once tried out the library called React Native Web, which is the web binding. I don't remember his name, but built by the guy who created the Twitter Lite client, if I remember correctly.
Chris.
Yeah. So we just tried out to see if it was possible to run a React navigation with fluid transitions using React Native Web, and it all worked just out of the box. So I mean, it's really cool, and we had great fun when doing that. I'm not sure if it works, if it still works, but it did in the early releases. So, and that's of course something. If you create a library like Fluid Transitions using Reanimated library to do native animations, we have to think about the web part. It's probably not going to be usable on the web with the new React Navigation Web, Eric.
Right. That is true. I've been hoping that someone would implement a JavaScript implementation on the web for Reanimated. And if you consider things like React Native DOM, where you're actually running your JavaScript code in two different threads, there's a quote unquote main thread, which is your normal JavaScript thread, and then your application code is actually running in a web worker. So React Native DOM has a similar thread architecture to React Native. And if you had a JavaScript implementation of Reanimated, you could use it directly on React Native Web, but then inside of React Native DOM, you could actually take that implementation and put it on the main thread side of things. So you could still get quite smooth gestures and animations on the web using React Native DOM's architecture, in addition to having compatibility with React Native Web itself. And you would also need to do the same thing with React Native Gesture Handler. And that's, I think, a little bit bigger of a project than implementing Reanimated on the web, in pure JavaScript. But I'm optimistic that someone will do this someday soon. And if I hear about this happening and you get in touch with me, I'll let you know about other people that are working on this. So hopefully we can start to get the ball rolling on that project.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So we're kind of getting close on time. Is there anything that anyone wanted to touch on before we start wrapping it up?
I think we've talked about the important stuff.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, let's go ahead and get to the picks then, I guess. Spencer, do you have any picks today?
Yeah, my picks are kind of two tools that I've just been using a lot lately, which I think I've talked about or have definitely been mentioned on here before. But one is Formic for building and managing forms. It's just, for all the things I've tried, it's the best solution out there. And then also Expo, particularly just deploying an app with Expo. I did it earlier this week, and every time I use it, it's just so easy to do. Like if you're just getting started with React Native, you just want to start playing with it. And like deploying intimidates you, which I know it intimidates a lot of people. Expo just makes it so easy to do that and to actually publish an app to the app stores. All
right. Eric, do you have any picks?
Sure. Yeah, those are great picks, Spencer. I mean, Formic and Expo, I also highly recommend. And as for my pick, I've been looking recently into actually RxJS. And I know, this whole reactive thing, it's almost like a community clash, not just a namespace clash with the React community, but almost Rx kind of comes from the Angular people. So I know, it hasn't seemed like these two things are getting along very well from the community perspective, but on a technical perspective, I think they do play really nicely to each other. You can use something called with observables to basically make it so that your React components are able to automatically re-render themselves if they're given an observable in their props. And I think this is a pretty powerful model for building large React applications. And I'm personally exploring that further in some of the abstractions that I'm working on. So I just want to throw a shout out to RxJS and say that I do think it's a pretty great companion for React apps.
Christian, do you have any picks today?
Yeah, I do. I have actually talked about one of the picks already. It's the Reanimated library. It's something that I've had so much fun with the last few weeks, and it's totally awesome. And I'm completely blown away by its all the possibilities and how well formed the library is and how good all the primitives are, just like Eric talked about. So that's my pick. That's my first pick. And I was were we supposed to have two picks?
You can have as many as you'd like, really.
Oh, thank you. So the second one was actually, since I used to play guitar in a band, and since I'm kind of an old fan of a band called Led Zeppelin. I've been completely hooked on a new band called Greta Van Fleet the last few weeks, which my son presented to me. So that's my second pick, that band.
Cool. Definitely +1 on Formic and also the Reanimated. And if you'd like to learn more about Reanimated, episode 108, we had Christoph, I think his name is pronounced. He was on the show talking about a bunch of different things he's working on, one of those being Reanimated. And I had the opportunity to meet Jared Palmer that runs the Formic project, or that created that, last week. And he's a really, really interesting guy. I would follow him on Twitter. I'd follow both of those guys on Twitter. They're pretty cool people to kind of keep up with. So my pick is actually a bunch of videos that I'm creating on Egghead. So like my pick is just Egghead, either as a content creator or if you're looking to learn something. I really like their style of fast and easy learning. It's basically just a condensed version of what I've seen elsewhere. So you can kind of just get a quick 1 to 5 minute bite of whatever you'd like to learn. And it's really good for people that have a lot of stuff going on in their lives. You may have just small pieces of time here and there. It's kind of a good way to consume content. I have a few videos coming out on AWS Amplify, on AWS AppSync. I have some videos coming out on React Native, and I even have a few videos coming out on Flutter. So if you're interested in learning any of that stuff, check it out. Some of them are free, some of them are not free. Okay, I think that wraps it up then. Christian and Eric, thank you guys for coming on today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been great. Until next time.
Until next time, for sure. There will be a next time. That wraps up this episode of React Native Radio, and we'll see everyone next week.